Welcome to the Young Film Academy podcast, the essential podcast for teenagers looking to make their way in the creative industries. I'm Amelia Sciandra, and I'm here with my buddy, Dan Allen.
What's up? How's it going?
That's a really understated greeting from you, which I enjoyed.
I know. But the energy and the enthusiasm was there. I had to sort of like box it into like just a noise, which is what I thought I'd do. But hopefully the excitement sort of, pours out of that noise for everyone to see. For
sure. And speaking of noise...
I'm trying to be like a score, yeah. I'm trying to be like a moody, unassuming score that's actually very effective, which,
yes,
again,
I love it.
something we're going to go on to.
And that's a beautiful segue. Loving it. That's a beautiful segue into our fantastic guest. We are talking to Graham Foote, who is an orchestrator and many, many other things. And he's going to give us the lowdown on all those things, I reckon, all the things he's gotten up to in his career. But most recently, very excitingly, I feel like this is maybe the first time we've ever done something so present. He was the orchestrator on a film that is currently in the cinema.
Yeah. Avatar 2.
Yeah,
how amazing
Avatar,
is that?
The Way of Water, which is so exciting.
The Way of the Water, so good. I'm a big Avatar fan. I love the world of Pandora. So I'm excited to discover what that was like, what the process was like, and also sort of unpackage what an orchestrator is, because we're familiar with this term composer, but we're not so familiar with this term orchestrator, which is which is cool. Yeah, most people, they aspire to be composers, but then it's like, well, what even is that, and how does that feed in? And all will be revealed, we hope.
Yes, we hope so. Let's do it.
Let's do it. So without any further ado, welcome to the podcast, Graham. How's it going?
Very well, thank you. How are you guys?
Very good, thank you. We're very excited to be chatting with you today.
Thank you very much.
And to sort of pick your brains and delve deeper into the music department, essentially within movies. So you work as an orchestrator and score prep as well. You have had a few different roles in a few different films, and also a vocalist as well on Avatar 2, which from your IMDb, have you done vocals before, or was that sort of, they were just like, we got Graham here?
Get
Graham on the mic.
So originally, before I got into film orchestration, I trained and studied as a musical theatre actor. That's what I did. And I had studied, music theoretically at school, at high school.
Yeah.
But I went to university, went to Performing Arts College, did a 3-year degree in prancing, and came out and that was my intention. And this was in Australia, and I came out and I did a few tours. I did the Asian tour of Jesus Christ Superstar. I'm going to sort of I'll time skip a little bit because I'll come back in time because it will be relevant to leading on to orchestrating.
Yeah.
Then I did a few other things, and then the last sort of big musical theatre thing that I did was I played Frankie Valli in Jersey Boys, the musical, both in Australia and also here.
Wow.
In the UK on the UK tour for a little while. Skipping back in between the kind of Superstar and Jersey Boys, I sang in this group called the 10 Tenors, which is an Australian classical crossover ensemble, for whom I sang for about 3.5 years. The last 2.5 years, I was their musical director. And through that, I met a man called Simon Franklin, who people will know from recent times as the composer for the music of Avatar 2. At that stage, he was working primarily in records, producing records, mainly classical crossover.
Yeah.
And we had a period of downtime in the Tenors where I was on holiday for about 6 weeks. We didn't have any tours going on. And I'd met Simon once. He'd produced a record that I had just been on as a singer before I became the musical director. And for some strange reason, I don't know why I did this, because I don't generally do the kind of cold emailing thing. I sent him an email saying, I'm incredibly bored. I'm not looking for a job necessarily, but if you have something that you need me to do, I'm sitting in an apartment in Germany with my now wife, then girlfriend at the time, with nothing to do. She's at uni all day. So if you've got anything you'd like me to do, then hit me up. And within sort of 5 or 10 minutes is my memory. It was probably about a week, but in my memory, it's this sort of serendipitous meeting of circumstance in my head. Simon sent me an email saying, "It's funny that you emailed because I have a job." And I don't know if you guys remember. I'm waffling a little bit, but I don't know if you remember. But here in the UK, about 12 years ago, there was this kind of record phenomenon that lasted for about 6 months, which was 3 non-professional singers releasing records. And I think it started with the Soldiers, who were 3 actually enlisted soldiers in British military servicemen in Afghanistan who came home from a tour of duty and recorded Bring Him Home from Les Mis. And it sold an enormous number of records. It was incredibly popular. And so, like anything that's popular, every record exec in Britain went, "Well, what else can we do?" And so then there were the priests.
Do we have any people in Iraq still that we can bring home and get them on a record?
The priests, and they had the nurses and the colonoscopists, and it just got progressively more and more ridiculous and sold progressively fewer and fewer records.
The Undertakers.
So we got brought on for this record that was called The Gondoliers.
Wow.
Which were 3 actual Venetian singing gondoliers who were wonderful.
Perfect.
And Simon brought me onto that project as a kind of guest singer to kind of enhance the record a little bit. And then it was I just kind of worked my way up through that process with him in records, started doing some vocal arrangements and then some string arrangements. And all the while, I had this incredible opportunity on the Ten Tenors tour where basically I had a kind of free playground to learn arrangement vocationally because I had, myself and 9 other professional singers at my disposal, plus a band where I could just write something and go, "Hey, let's try this." And we tried in rehearsal, and if it was rubbish, I'd go, "Okay, well, we won't do that." And sometimes it would be really good, and we put it in the show. And then you're getting this immediate audience feedback of the work that you're doing. And that was a fantastic experience. I'm very fortunate to have had that opportunity because I didn't have to learn necessarily in the kind of traditional tertiary context of going to university and learning composition and all that stuff. I had a technical, theoretical foundation in music, but in terms of working as an arranger, most of my experience has come vocationally. And that's something that has sort of a realization that's kind of followed me throughout my career, is that I think the further away from school you get, the more you realize that actually school is so focused on channeling children into this quite narrow pathway of learning. And that's not to say that there aren't, millions and millions of children who would benefit enormously from that, finishing schooling, going to university, and working their way up in a hierarchical structure in their workspace. But in the creative industry, I think that most people actually, the bulk of their learning is done working on small independent films, working on, by being in a band, and actually taking the practical lessons from doing that and applying it to the work that you're doing and finding that didn't work. Okay, well, I won't do that again.
Well, Graham, I think I do want to say that it's important, I think, that you say we didn't pay you to say this, because what you're talking about is, the ethos of Young Film Academy, that experiential learning, practical learning that you get on the job, doing something, in the actual moment, in situ, is the best. It's the best way to learn, and it's the best thing to take with you. And the fact that you were getting to do that when you were young in a totally different way, arranging for live shows and arranging for 10 singers versus what you're going to tell us about now, what you do now, is what an amazing trajectory. And also, the proof is in the pudding. You're the proof that experiential learning is the way. It's the best way.
Absolutely, and I think they can be combined. I don't think you can get any great fruit out of that experiential learning without having some sort of foundation.
Of course,
I think you need to understand what it is that you're doing, obviously. But the kind of, if we think of it as the kind of the traditional apprentice, journeyman, master kind of process of going through your working experience, that traditional secondary and tertiary learning experience, I think, all comes under the apprentice part of that. Mm-hmm. And that's preparing you, giving you the kind of the grounding and the kind of the solidity that you will need later on. Because if you think about filmmaking, most of the geniuses that we think of, whether they're directors, actors, composers, cinematographers, writers, they're often the ones who are pushing the boundaries of what is understood. So if you're always beholden to the idea of pre-existing technique or pre-existing knowledge, then the art form will forever be static and stodgy, and it will stay the same. People will just be churning out the same stuff. So you do need to be able to apply it in a real-world practical sense. And I think that's
getting that response from the audience, right? It's, as you were saying, like you got to hear very quickly whether the bits that you wrote were working, what the response was to it, and then I suppose you can adapt and change it. It's not just an exercise-based thing. It's what's the response I get, and how can I then take that on board?
Absolutely.
For the next thing.
I mean, live audiences are the most brutal test group you could possibly imagine. There's no. They don't sort of clap politely and then fill out a form afterwards telling you that they didn't like it. If they don't like something, they will be silent. There are few things worse in life as a performer than being in an auditorium, with thousands of people in the audience and like no one claps. It's a horrific thing. So you kind of that molds you. You go, oh, I'm not going to do that again. That was awful. So it's kind of baptism of fire from an arranger's perspective, but I'm very lucky to have had it. Yeah.
So you obviously already had this background in, or you could sing from your sort of musical theatre days. You then started learning to arrange things. How did you then make the jump into film and working on films? Did you start with independent films?
No, I didn't. So this is a story that I'm happy to share.
Sorry.
Because I haven't ever spoken about this publicly. The first ever film that I worked on was uncredited. I didn't get a credit for it. The first ever film that I worked on was The Amazing Spider-Man in 2012, the first Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movie.
That is amazing.
And at the time, I was on tour with Jersey Boys in New Zealand. I was actually in the rehearsals for Jersey Boys at the time. And Simon called me up. James Horner was the composer on that. Simon was doing some work. And he asked me, he said, do you know how to take MIDI information from Pro Tools and input it into a score in Sibelius, which is a score notation software? And I genuinely had no idea. I'd never opened Pro Tools in my life. I'd worked with Sibelius a lot and I knew how to input music, but I had no idea how to do that MIDI conversion process.
Yeah.
But I went, yep. I definitely know how to do that because that sounds like an amazing job. And he spoke to me for a little while about what was required, and basically it was a very kind of important but quite rudimentary task. I now know, taking the programming information of the mock-up from Pro Tools, putting it in quite a basic form into the score so that it could then be sent to the orchestration team to be fleshed out into detail. Basically, it's just taking that kind of mundane conversion task off the plate of the orchestrator.
So just to clarify, so for the listeners, a MIDI information is essentially, it's a timeline of notes, basically, that your virtual instruments can then play by playing through that timeline of notes. That's right,
yeah. So if you play, say, a middle C from a keyboard and that gets recorded as MIDI information, that's obviously digital information that plays. It can play back as a piano sound or a violin sound or a snare drum, whatever it might be. You can then extrapolate that MIDI information back into music notation. But it was quite dodgy. It's gotten better over the last few years, but back then it was quite difficult. The programs didn't really talk to each other very well, and so it required you knowing how to do it. And I sort of felt, I did the job and it was fine. At the time and then sort of in the ensuing years, I didn't want to talk about it because I felt sort of guilty, I suppose. I felt like I kind of lied my way into working in movies. But I now sort of think about it, I'm a bit more charitable to myself now, and I think, actually, because what I did when I hung up it was a Skype call. When I hung up the Skype call, the first thing I did was Google, how do you convert MIDI from Pro Tools to Sibelius? And I watched a whole load of YouTube tutorials.
Yeah.
And I suppose what I took away from that experience is that, actually, I had faith in my own ability to learn very quickly. And for actually, in terms of my capacity to deliver the final job, it wouldn't affect anything in terms of the timeline. if that makes sense. So even though I didn't have the knowledge when I said yes, I suppose the reason why I said yes was that I had faith in my own capacity to learn it very quickly and still be able to do the job that was asked of me. And I think that's really important, not just in the creative arts, but in any working professional environment. Having a really healthy sense of both your strengths, the things that you contribute, but also your areas of weakness, and having a really healthy perspective of what you do well, but also what you need to work on, is really important. And I think I had confidence in my own ability to learn quite quickly.
Do you think there's a safe point of like doing the work that you're comfortable doing, or putting yourself out of your comfort zone? Like, obviously there's a gray area there, and I wondered if you had a sense of when's a good time to make the leap and say to yourself, yes, I can do that, or no, I can't. Would you always say just go for it and teach yourself, or is there some things
wouldn't.
where
I think, in that quite simple example wherein there are two aspects really to that process. The first aspect of that process was taking the information out of Pro Tools, which I didn't know how to do.
Yeah.
But the second aspect of it was inputting that information into a music notation software. That side of the job I did have, I felt very comfortable with. So there was really only probably one element of discomfort in that decision. I think if a costume designer had come to me and said, hey, do you know how to sew sequins on some leotards? And I'd said, yes, I think that's putting yourself too far into the deep end of the pool. I think you have to have some foundation in what it is. So I think you can stretch yourself from a position of comfort, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You're still sitting
100%.
in your comfortable chair, but stretching your arms out as far as you can.
You don't want to be suddenly on set gluing Spider-Man sort of eyes to the mask.
Exactly, and they're upside down, and all of a sudden his costume's green, and you're the reason why this multi-million-dollar movie is stopping for a week because his costume's wrong. You don't want to be in that position.
Did you know it was Spider-Man when you got the call? Did he explain that, or did you just sort of arrive there and or start playing the music and you're like, this sounds suspiciously like the Spider-Man theme?
No, I think I did know. I think I did know. No, I think that's the reason why I said yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it had been like, we've got this really dry documentary about, accounting practices in southeastern Alabama, I might have gone, no, I'm probably not available. But it was, Spider-Man. So you go, well, yeah, of course I'm available. I'd love to be involved with that. And so that was my first experience in film.
What a first one.
Which was it's a great movie to have started with. Yeah, very cool.
And then how quickly did you move from that into orchestrating, or were you doing prep like that for a little while, or did you do like orchestrating alongside
so
that? How did that's
the only time where I did that job actually. I didn't, which probably means that I didn't do it very well. But that's the only time that I did that job. And then, then I was busy with Jersey Boys for a little while. And so my head was sort of back in performing mode. And then around Easter 2014, my wife and I moved to London. And that was inspired by a number of reasons. There were some personal family reasons why we wanted. My wife is European, and we wanted to be a bit closer to her family. But the other thing was this: I sort of had realized that my life as a performer. My wife doesn't work in performing arts. She's a muggle.
That's what I call them too.
Yeah.
Is she an accountant?
No, she works. Excuse me. No, she works in the. She works in the library industry, like academic library industry.
Oh, cool.
So cool. Our lives were completely incompatible because she was, everyone talks about a 9 to 5, but it's not really once you factor in commuting and, getting ready. Her life was kind of 7:30 to 6:30. And by the time she would get home, I would already be on my way to the theatre to do the show at night. I would get home at kind of 11:30, but she'd be getting up at 6 o'clock the following day. And I'd finished a show 30 minutes prior, so I still had all this adrenaline running through my body. So we really didn't see each other. We weren't even ships in the night. We were sort of comatose in the same bed as each other for about 5 hours a day. That was essentially it. And I just sort of realized this isn't a life. I don't, and I realized that I'd done performing because I was good at it, but I didn't necessarily have a great passion for the life that came with it. And I think especially when you're a theatre performer, doing 8 shows a week, it cannibalizes a lot of your life. And I think there's a reason why, consequently, a lot of, certainly theatre actors tend to gravitate to other theatre actors in their personal lives as well, because their lives are so, compatible in terms of the time. And there's not a lot of consistency, and, you have to invest something of yourself emotionally. So I think consequently, maybe you become slightly emotionally unavailable in other parts of your life because you're so open and raw when you're doing the kind of performing process.
Yeah, it's almost like the honesty then takes place on stage.
Yeah.
And then you become more closed
Absolutely.
off stage.
And you can't sort of, you try, and I always found that I would try not to carry that into my day-to-day life. And so consequently, the only way that you can really do that is kind of by shutting down a little bit. You have to kind of turn off that tap, that emotional tap, I suppose. And so I didn't really enjoy the lifestyle aspects of it. So I wanted to move into kind of more behind the scenes stuff. And honestly, I'm happy to say when we moved to the UK, the film thing didn't really happen for me straight away, and I kind of had these moments of going, God, I left, a relatively successful performing career in Australia to move to the other side of the world, and I'm not doing what I want to be doing. Why did we do that? And then initially my sort of re-entry into film was initially as a singer again. I ended up singing on James Horner, the film composer, one of his final film scores, which was a relatively small film called Living in the Age of Airplanes, which is a documentary about, surprisingly, airplanes. And I sang all the vocals on that score. And then
was that just an open casting call, or was that
that was through my relationship with Simon. So Simon Franklin, who's the composer to Avatar 2, was very much sort of James Horner's right-hand man, was his score producer, arranger, and so that connection came through Simon, and it was just a great thrill to be, obviously I didn't know at the time that it would be one of James's final scores, but he was and very much remains one of my real musical heroes. I've never told him because it would have been weird, but
just sit him down.
He's such a hero of mine. But I used to do this thing. This is, again, I'm revealing something here. I used to do this thing when my dad would leave the house. I didn't do this every day, mind you, but I certainly did it on more than one occasion. When my dad would leave the house when I was about 11 or 12 maybe, I would put on the Braveheart score on like our house stereo as loud as I could and pretend to conduct the orchestra.
Oh,
because I just
amazing.
There was just something about that music that just really massively resonated with me emotionally. I think it's just one of the most wonderful scores. I really do. Yeah. And so to be working on, his music was a real privilege. And then James unfortunately died in a plane crash at the middle of 2015. And I only met him the one time. I met him when we did a vocal recording session. This is sort of leading us to the big blue alien people. I met him at Air Studios here in London doing a recording session for some vocals for the Avatar theme park. Which he was.
I'm very excited to visit at some point.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. And so he was, at that stage was kind of doing the music for that. I'd done some demos for some of the music for one of the rides. He wanted to get some more detailed demos. He wanted to spend some time in the studio. And I think that was only sort of 3 weeks. It was a great thrill of mine, I'd done the airplane movie, and then to be doing, the Avatar theme park music. I loved the first film. I loved the music from the first film. to be meeting and working with one of my musical heroes was amazing. And then I think it was 3 or 4 weeks later that he passed away. Which was obviously devastating. And the one day where I met him, he was just a really incredibly kind man, and obviously extremely talented, very gentle. In my experience with him, and just a lovely, lovely gentleman. And then we did the. Then there was sort of this humongous gap in film music in general, but also specifically in the Avatar theme park project. And so Simon Franklin, the composer for whom I've done a lot of my orchestration work, he was asked to complete that task, to complete the music for the theme park, because Simon was such an integral part of the sound of the first film, alongside James composing the music. So Simon was kind of the logical continuation of that process, I suppose. And so that really was my first...
music as well.
It's amazing.
It's so because it's so grounded for a sci-fi, right? Like often sci-fi, it's so computer-generated sounds often you find, whereas it was so earthy, I guess.
Yeah, it's really incredibly evocative, and the starting point, interestingly enough, for all of James Cameron's films, I think, is they start from a great sort of sense of humanity, even though you're dealing with quite abstract, often sci-fi concepts, whether it's Aliens, Terminator franchise, obviously Avatar. At their core, they're really very simple films in terms of the core kind of human connection that we make with them. And so it made sense for the music, I suppose, to not be kind of digital and lots of industrial textures and kind of futuristic, trying to be, kind of traditional sci-fi kind of stuff. It made sense that they should be grounded in a kind of earthy, organic soundscape. And so, the theme park was an incredible experience doing that, because it was such an amazing variety of music that needed to be done because of the various aspects of the park at Disney. And I think we did 5 hours of music for that, for the theme park, or something crazy like that. And that was my first...
It's like almost bigger than a feature, right?
It's much bigger, yeah. It's, in some cases twice the size of a feature score. Maybe 3 times the size if you're talking about animation. Obviously some music more complex than others. Included in that 5 hours is basic kind of drum loop stuff that plays, in the corner of the toilets at 3 o'clock in the morning. Because when you go to the park, there's music everywhere. I mean, you really are surrounded by the sound of Avatar when you're there. And that's, I suppose, part of Disney's focus on immersion in their real life.
An immersive toilet experience. they want that sense of... Actually, it's interestingly enough, one of the biggest challenges that we had in the music of the park, there is, because of the layout of the land, there's the restaurant, which is called the Satuli Canteen, and then there's a bar where you can buy like alcoholic drinks, pongu pongu, and they had very different kind of musical kind of ideas as to what the kind of soundscape should be. The idea for the canteen was that it should be quite traditionally Avatar, that it should sound really like the score from the first film. And then the brief, if I remember correctly, for the bar was that it's operated by a character who's human, who kind of has been not stranded on Pandora, but has been kind of living there and semi-immersing himself with the Na'vi people. And so the idea was that it should be kind of human music, bar music, lounge music, but that's been sort of influenced by the Na'vi people. Interesting.
So the two kind of musical ideas are very non-complementary. The complicating factor was that you can hear the music for both things when you're in the other installation. So because they're so close in proximity, you can hear the music for the bar when you're sitting in the canteen and vice versa. So consequently, they can't be in different tempos. These are looping music. They repeat throughout the day. But they had to be in the same tempo. They had to be in the same or complementary keys. And they had to, in some way, interlock. So I remember when we were arranging that music, the only way we could do it was we had 2 music rigs set up side by side. And as you were arranging the music for the canteen, you had to have the track from the bar playing concurrently with the music that you were arranging to make sure that you weren't causing this kind of
cacophony
of sound.
Wow.
Fascinating thing. It was a really interesting challenge.
That is so, it's just being so spatially aware, isn't it? Of just like, of where these sounds are going to be playing, making sure they're going to have that effect. But then also it's like noise bleed, but like noise bleed feels like the wrong word, almost derogatory to the fact that you've actually got 2 really nice pieces of music.
Yeah.
Playing within these 2 spaces. Yeah, that has to fit together.
Yeah, and so we had to create these kind of interlocking loops that, as I say, were kind of musically complementary, but sounded like they inhabited 2 completely different kind of identities, I suppose. And so that was a really unique challenge for the park. And that was my first kind of real proper experience of kind of string and orchestral, arranging and orchestration.
Were there instruments you hadn't written for before that you were suddenly having to write for? And is it easy to translate from instrument to instrument, or is it hard to sort of know what different instruments are good at, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things you need to, a good orchestrator will understand that you need to kind of inhabit the psychology of the player in order to understand how they're going to best play their instrument. It's not enough to just write music that sounds good when you're playing it back from a notation program, or that looks good on a page theoretically. You have to understand that at some point these kind of abstract concepts, these black and white things on a page, lines and squiggly bits, at some point that's going to be interpreted by up to 100 musicians. And so you need to ensure that session musicians, session orchestras don't see the music beforehand. They come in cold. They're reading this thing on the page for the first time, and you have to ensure that they have the correct information to play the music so that it sounds the way that you want it to sound without having to spend lots of time fixing what you've put on the page. And the only way you can do that is by inhabiting the mindset of the player, and that can only come with experience. But to your point of, like, were there instruments? Yeah, for sure there were. But from a kind of arranging perspective, as long as you understand the technical aspects of, you can't have a tuba that was a low-end brass instrument playing in the same register as a high violin line, because A, they won't be able to do it, B, it will sound awful even if they could do it, and C, the player will hate you forever. So, you have to understand the where each instrument kind of works best, what its deficiencies are, what it can do, what it can't do, what sections of players will sound like versus what a soloist will sound like. But the kind of concept of arranging in terms of, a high register, whether it's a soprano voice or a violin or a flute versus bass instruments, whether it's a double bass, whether it's a tuba or a contrabassoon, the concept of kind of vertical arranging, if you think of it from high to low or low to high, however you want, those concepts do translate between strings and brass and woodwinds, for example, or choir. So you can, the other man who was one of the 2 lead orchestrators on Avatar 2, Jack Redford, who's an incredibly good orchestrator, very, very kind man, he talks a lot about the choirs of an orchestra. He refers to them as kind of passing musical information between the choirs, the string choir, the brass choir, the woodwind choir, because at its fundamental, a cello is the same as a tenor voice. Violin 1 is the same as a soprano. So you can, and this is where it sort of gets back to what I was talking about before with vocal arranging, the kind of fundamental technical theoretical aspects of what I was learning as a vocal arranger all those years before did apply when it came to extrapolating that out to the orchestra.
Interesting. Wow. Did you have sort of classical musical training? Like, could you play the piano, or did this all come from your understanding of vocal arrangements?
Yeah, so I had kind of theoretical training from school. So I know what a treble clef looks like. And I know all the kind of.
I can draw one of those.
Yeah, it's squiggly G. All of those kind of theoretical foundation points, I suppose, were already in there. But it's a bit like, I sort of think about it. It's like if you see, lying on a big field, if you see a pile of bricks and some square panes of glass and some roof slates, you can look at it and go, well, I know what a brick is, and I know what a window pane is, and I know what a roof slate is, and I know what a doorknob is, but I don't know how to build a house. So the arranging process is that you learn how to combine those elements, those theoretical elements together to make a piece of music. And that...
Interesting.
That comes into, there are theoretical things that you can learn. You can go all the way back to the great masters like Bach and learn about counterpoint. You can learn about jazz tonality from the great early 20th century masters. There are obviously, we all take lessons from the people who've gone before us in that respect. But then it also gets into more abstract concepts like taste and personal choice. There's an artistry that goes along with it. I won't orchestrate something the same way as another orchestrator. We will all apply our own sense of craft to what we're given. And therein lies the sort of that struggle, I guess, between art and craft or, technique, I suppose.
And so then did you end up working with Simon? So does Simon work in film as a composer, or is he on the orchestration side of things as well? Because a composer obviously would be a term that's more familiar to our listeners. They're generally credited with the writing, air quotes, of the music. But obviously, as we're going to hear from you, it's a much bigger world than that in production.
Yeah, I mean, film composers are... I think we have this sense of, when we say composer, I think we all bring this kind of preconceived bias of this slightly Toulouse-Lautrec, turn of the 20th century, Moulin Rouge bohemian figure of someone sitting in a cafe with a scarf and a beret with some sheet music in front of them and just waiting until this, beautiful man or woman walks past and inspires this incredible opus that flows out of them like liquid gold. Film composing is nothing like that. It really isn't. It's nothing like that. Film composing and being a composer on a Hollywood project like Avatar 2 is, yes, of course, there is an enormous creative aspect to it. Of course, that goes without saying, I think. But they are also schedulers, they're people managers, they're negotiators, and I think the most important thing is they're storytellers. They have to be storytellers, but crucially, they're not telling their own story. They're maybe telling the director's story, but I would say that they're not even doing that. They're telling the film's story. And the best film composers are storytellers with their music. And I don't think you can impose your own kind of desires onto that. It may well be that the best thing for a scene in a film is some incredibly complex piece of John Williams chase music. It may also be that the best thing for a scene in a film is a single piano note with a bit of reverb playing for 4 minutes. That might be the most evocative musical choice for that film at that moment in time. So the film composer has to inhabit all of these worlds. And Simon came from, a perspective of working with James as his producer, arranger, orchestrator, synth programmer. I think the first thing that they did together was Simon was brought on to do all the synth programming on Titanic back, 1997, 96, 97.
Yeah.
And so when James passed away, Simon was asked to take over the kind of the compositional duties. So he kind of moved up into the big chair, I suppose. And so everyone around him had to kind of step up as well. And we were all asked to take, more responsibility in that respect. Like, I would be quite happy to say that I didn't have a relationship with James Horner, and I think, had he not tragically passed away, I don't think I probably would have been orchestrating on Avatar 2, or certainly my pathway into it would have been very different. And that's the horrible thing about those circumstances when you have such close-knit teams of people like James did, of which Simon was such an integral part. And Simon had his own team. As I said before, we were working mainly in records. When those personal tragedies happen, there's the personal cost, but then at some point the professional consideration has to be taken care of again. And, in this particular instance, Simon was asked to fill James's shoes. And I think he's done an incredible job on Avatar 2. But that process was very much informed by his relationship with James. And so I think as a composer, Simon's sense of drama and sense of story is wonderful. And he just has a real feel for the scene. And, the orchestrator sits underneath the composer in terms of the hierarchy of the film itself, but they feed into each other. They really do, especially in film music. It's such a collaborative process. And I sort of liken it to Michelangelo and the Sistine Chapel, I suppose.
Yeah.
He had assistants who helped him. Excuse me. He had assistants who helped him with building the scaffolding and doing the plastering and transferring some of the cartoons onto the wall. But all of the painting was done by Michelangelo. And most importantly for this analogy, the conceptualization of how it should look was done by one person. And that is the same with the film composer.
That's my question I wanted to ask you in terms of creative process. So, like you said, the composer is Michelangelo, and so you're taking the role of building the scaffolding and maybe putting the faces and for him to come back to. But in terms of what you do, where you take the music and then you're going to kind of farm it out to the whole orchestra, you're writing the piece, you're writing every line of music that every instrument is going to play. Is there ever a moment? Is there a part of the process where you do that and the composer listens or looks at it and says, "That's actually not what I imagined"? Or do you have kind of free reign in terms of those orchestrations?
Yes.
So both.
Absolutely. Yes to both. And there is I think one of the hardest things in the world would be writing a job description of a film orchestrator because it is different on a cue by cue basis. It's different on a film by film basis. It's different on a composer by composer basis. And so I suppose the most instructive thing is to give you the two complete extreme ends of the spectrum, one of which thankfully is much less common than the other, but I have had it once. I won't say what film it was, but I haven't done many, so you'll be able to work it out. The extreme end of the spectrum is you have a composer who comes and they go, "Here's my action theme. That's my action theme. Go and write a 4-minute action cue using that theme."
Wow.
That's not orchestrating, is it?
Wow.
That's composing.
Yeah.
That is incredibly rare.
Okay, good.
But it does happen.
Yeah.
It tends to happen at the lower end of the film industry, but it does absolutely happen. All the way through to the other end of the spectrum, which is, if any of your listeners have seen like a John Williams sketch, for example, it is completely conceived from start to finish. He has written by hand what the violins are doing from bar 1 to bar 100. He's written what the flutes are doing. He's written what the brass are doing. He's written what the percussion is doing. It is finished.
Wow.
Right. So what's your role then?
That's amazing.
The orchestration job. So in that instance, the orchestration job may well be, so he might have written, quite often we talk about doubling in the orchestra. So not all the time, but a very typical doubling in, say, romantic big kind of soaring love theme, you might have the violin ones and the violin twos playing that. You might also have it doubled in the trumpets. You might even have it doubled in the oboes and the flutes. So there might be six instruments playing the same musical information. So in the sketch form, John Williams may write it out on the violin 1 line, and then on the violin 2 stave, he'll write, follow violin 1, and he'll go draw a big long line, and then and he'll do the same on the trumpets, he'll do the same on the oboes, the same on the flute. So then the job of the orchestrator in that situation is just taking his handwritten sketch form and extrapolating out what his instructions are to the rest of the orchestra. So really, in that sense, there's not much creative input at all from the orchestrator.
Right.
It's really a job of copying the predetermined musical information from the composer and putting it onto the page.
It's a bit like translating in that sense.
Pretty much, yeah. And so that's the other extreme of the spectrum. So if you take kind of, writing the score as 0 and the John Williams sketch example is 10 from an orchestrator's responsibility, I'd say most of the time it sits around a 6 or a 7. So most of the time you're talking about the most typical examples, say on films of late, whether it's Avatar 2 or Notre Dame on Fire, a film that we did earlier last year, might be something like either there will be a Pro Tools session in which we've got samples loaded and the composer has written out a whole demo. He's got drum loops and he's got guitars and he's got, string chords and brass chords and woodwind things, and he's written out in sketch form in that. But maybe the detail of the inner voicings of the strings isn't exactly how you'd want it replicated by a live player. Or, the composer might say, do 6 bars. I want something like this for the ensuing 38 bars. So come up with something that's complementary to that gesture that I've given you, but sort of adapt it and grow it over that period of time. Or another typical example is you might get a piano sketch in which all of the harmonic language in terms of the chords that they might use, the melodies played in the right hand are all there, but then they might say, can you arrange this piano piece for strings and clarinet, for example, and harp, So then you're not really writing anything. You're just kind of, that's probably more like translation, actually.
Yeah.
You're taking the conception of, in the case of film music, the tempo, even potentially, if you're talking about the piano sketch, the range of the cue, like, this particular part of the cue is very much in the high range of the piano, then the kind of left hand comes in with bass notes. You extrapolate that over the orchestra, how that might work in a way that's complementary to the piano sketch that's been given to you. But you're not really writing anything in that sense. You're interpreting the composer's response to the scene, and they've had an emotional response with the piano to the way that the scene is working. And so you have to be very careful about being faithful to that and making sure that you're not imposing your own kind of musical identity on their music, I guess. But you do have to take a view. You can't just replicate it wholesale. So it's a very strange relationship, I think, between the composer and the orchestrator. It's one of great trust, but much like the composer is telling the film's story, as we said before, the orchestrator is presenting the composer's vision.
Right.
And creating the link between that response that the composer is having to the picture and then extrapolating that, and how can I take that emotional input that I'm getting, translate that information to a 100-piece orchestra so that when it's the final film, we have that same emotional response.
Are you dealing with temp stuff as well? Like, do you, because I know, so temp music being like, generally it's music from other films that is put in alongside an edit, and then the composer often has to come up with a new version of that. Do you end up with that as well, like having to come up with new versions of pre-existing score?
Absolutely, yeah. That's very common. And it can be extremely helpful. It can also be really problematic. The great advantage that we had on Avatar 2 was that, we had a temp score, but a lot of it was temped with Avatar 1.
I was going to say, you had a whole film of score.
So the most difficult thing, I think, is when the temp is either just bad or most unhelpfully is when it's just completely wrong. So you might have this, really delicate romantic conversation between someone who's on their deathbed and their partner of 65 years, and they've temped it with Time from Inception, Hans Zimmer with these big chords, and the director for whatever reason goes, yeah, that's exactly what I want. And that's the really problematic conversation, because the interesting thing about the music team is you're always the last people hired.
Interesting.
You can't write music to a film until the film's, at least there is a working edit of the film. There's no virtue in writing an action cue if you don't know where the hit points are. If you don't know that Obi-Wan Kenobi flying his spaceship into a wall at 2 minutes and 47 of that cue, you need to know exactly where that is so you can catch it in the music. You can't write that 6 months before that scene's even been shot. So
I heard Hans Zimmer comes on. Christopher Nolan gets Hans Zimmer on, or it used to be Hans Zimmer, to do music before they shoot. But I imagine that's just sort of motifs and melodies that will then go on to influence the score. Is that generally?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, in the case of The Dark Knight, that was certainly true. I think Hans had done a whole load of a whole suite of ideas for the Joker. I think.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And I remember reading or seeing an interview with him with Chris Nolan talking about that process, where I think Zimmer had given him like 9 hours of music of these strange, crazy textures and this idea, razor blades on electric cello strings and all sorts of crazy stuff. And Chris Nolan listened to it on a flight from London to LA or reverse. And it was like 9 hours of music or something that Hans had just given him this huge palette of stuff. And Christopher Nolan was like, yeah, somewhere in there is the sound of the Joker. I don't quite know where yet, but somewhere in there. But then you still do have to then... So that's a kind of an exercise in evoking a sense of atmosphere that may well be useful for, the actors on set, or it may well be useful for the filmmaker to establish a kind of mood. But when you're talking about the actual process of then composing the final score to picture, you would then have to do it again, because you need to, as I said, adhere to the edit.
Yeah. So you get brought on just as the film is wrapping, or once it's wrapped and once there's an edit in progress, or even after an edit's done? At what stage is the orchestrator brought on? Do you come on sort of a few months after the composer, or are you coming in at the same time, generally speaking?
No, so in the case of Avatar 2, we did, the first work that we did on Avatar 2 was in the beginning of 2018. Was the first work that we did, because there is some...
So it really wasn't going to be ready for 2015 then?
Well, no, because they were shooting. And so
there
were for those of you who've seen the film, there's some what we call diegetic music, which is not score that exists kind of in this kind of weird ethereal space that's not literally in the world that you're watching. There are some instances when Zoe Saldana's character Neytiri sings on set, so that needed to be written, and that needed to be a thematic idea that would extend into the score itself. And what she sings at the beginning and the end of the film has subsequently become kind of the main theme of Avatar 2. So that was unusual in that respect, because we had that stuff. So Simon was writing that stuff back then, and we were sort of assisting in that process, so that they could have some stuff to shoot. And then they shot the film, and then COVID happened, everything stopped, which is as much, an aspect behind the delay as anything. In fact, it was probably the biggest factor. And then we started in earnest a year ago, the beginning of January 2022 was when we started doing the score
Oh wow! So that feels in the scheme of how long the sequels have been in production, that feels like a very small part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we had, there was, when we started, there was a working edit, and
gotcha.
It was the process of just putting the music to picture. And the edit was changing.
Was that cut like 6 hours long?
No, it was pretty. I mean, it was longer than the final theatrical cut, but it wasn't insane. It was It was at least a ballpark edit of what the final, what they thought the final theatrical might end up being. There was some stuff that was trimmed along the way, as always happens in all films. But we were getting sort of picture turnovers pretty frequently. I think at least. Kind of once, I think we were getting music picture turnovers once every 2 weeks, I think. So sometimes it was music that you hadn't written yet, and so it didn't affect your process because you just kind of replaced that thing that you were going to do and put the new one in. But often, again, it's not unique to Avatar. It's the same with everything. You have this piece of music that you've slavishly crafted to a scene, and then 8 frames gets cut from here and 12 seconds gets cut from there, and all of a sudden your piece of music doesn't work at all. And
you can't just snip it. And...
Sometimes you can. And
you can? Yeah. Can you just crossfade? Or...
Sometimes you can. It sounds ridiculous, but you can. We have, there's music editors precisely for that purpose.
Wow.
And not only can you sometimes make edits. So the first, whenever we get a scene, like an edit that's come in for a piece of music that's already been written, the first part of the process is the music editor will see if they can conform it to the new picture. And
gotcha.
So they're constantly dealing with the turnovers much more than the music, the composition department is dealing with that stuff.
Yeah.
The first port of call will be, can we make this work at all? And it's only at the point when the music editing team goes, we can't do this anymore, it's broken beyond repair, that's when the rewriting of a cue then happens. So we always try and salvage stuff, but also nothing's ever quite lost. There are always happy accidents. I remember we did a score called The Curse of Turandot as a Chinese film. And I think it's a score that we're all very proud of. We really, really like the music that we did for that. And there was a sequence that we'd written music for. Simon had written this fantastic cue of... it was like reel 2 of a 6-reel movie. So it was in the first act of the film. And the composer liked the music, but it didn't really work for the scene. And so it was removed, and Simon wrote another cue. And then when we got to the end of the movie, there was another scene that worked that was quite similar in terms of its kind of content to the thing from the first act. And I remember this thing where I literally grabbed an MP3, not even, the proper session. I just grabbed something from like iTunes and dragged it over to my session. And Simon and I are watching this on Skype at the time. I mean, and to the frame, the piece of dumped music from the first act worked. I mean, absolutely spookily perfect.
That's movie magic, isn't it?
It was, it was literally a drag and drop, but it just worked. Yeah. It was just the most extraordinary thing. And I genuinely don't think we had to change a note.
Very cool.
It was, we just had to write a different tale to it.
And you get that, didn't you? And then like the crashes hit at the right time later on in the scene. And
honestly,
stuff,
it was like you had slavishly spent days crafting it to the scene, and it just worked gloriously. And so you think, that's obviously meant to be. That piece of music was obviously always meant to be there.
Yeah.
We were the stupid people that put it in the wrong place. And so you try and repurpose things wherever you can, because obviously in a film like Avatar, there's so much music. It's basically wall to wall for, over 3 hours. So there's a lot of music to do. So any time where you can kind of give yourself a break and either try and, repurpose music for later in the film, it may well be that the string motif, the rhythmic string motif that you've used on that thing, the first hour of the film, maybe that works really well in the last half an hour if you write new brass or new choir part, or you can dress it up in a different way so it's not just copy and pasting. You try and repurpose that music, because not only does it make your life easier, but also it lends the score a sense of consistency and continuity. It feels, everyone does it. John Williams returns to the similar thematic or kind of textural ideas throughout his scores for Star Wars all the time.
Well, I was going to say,
I love that though, when you create flashbacks, don't you? Or it creates a sense of like you're drawing parallels between two moments.
Absolutely,
as well.
You have to. You can't.
Yeah, I was going to say,
and this goes back.
It's motifs, right?
Sorry.
And I wondered actually if any of your kind of perspective of that came from your background in musical theater, because that's a super common thing in musical theater scores where there's the repetition of a motif from one storytelling moment to another that is, like in Les Mis, it's heartbreaking when you hear a piece of music again and it's placed somewhere else. And it happens quite a lot in musical theater. And I wondered, if and this might lend itself to the question that Dan will ask you in just a bit that we always end with, but I wondered if that background in musical theater and that use of motifs, did any of that sort of inform the way that you approach your work now?
In a sense, I think musical theatre and film music both owe a great debt to opera. So I think
interesting.
I think that sense of kind of motivic, thematic consistency across a work is very much an aspect of certainly romantic opera and in classical opera as well. You can absolutely draw a straight line from Wagner, The Ring, or whatever, some of the great works of Puccini or Mozart operas, Rossini. You can draw a straight line from those pieces to Howard Shore's work in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
they are inextricably linked in the way that they use musical identity to tell story, to reinforce a connection. And I think themes are most evocative and they're most powerful when they're not attached to people or things. I think that's the most boring way of using a theme. Oh, Rebecca's walked on stage right. Let's play the Rebecca tune. Boring, so boring. But when it's used to evoke loss, connection, heartbreak, love, the identity of a tribe, whatever it might be, those more abstract musical connections are so much more emotional.
My favorite is the Duel of Fates in Star Wars, which is such like a cool piece of music, and then they use it in the second prequel. So it was from the first prequel, but then it was when like the Jedis fight Darth Maul. So it's sort of this Sith versus Jedi. And then they play it in the second film when Anakin's about to go and slaughter all of the Sand people. And it just sort of shows this sort of conflict of like the Sith and the Jedi inside of him. That's also that music is so good.
Absolutely.
Gives me tingles.
Well, and for me, it was what you just mentioned. For me, the Shire music in the first Lord of the Rings.
Absolutely.
That music comes in. I mean, I have that on a playlist that I listen to by itself because it makes me so happy and it's such evocative music that Shire music. Yeah, absolutely.
But it's not, it's not as literal as the Hobbit music. No. I mean, how redundant would that, that I think you're talking,
yes.
It's such a great, simple little tune.
God, you took me there. Just
those notes. It takes you there. It does.
if you heard that, say, every time Sam was on screen, it would be so rubbish.
Yeah, it would be awful.
But because really that theme, it's about kind of joy and innocence, isn't it? It's about the kind of the carefree nature of the Shire. Yeah. And so it's attached to Hobbiton primarily. But it's really it's an expression of their it's not simplicity, but their kind of naivety and their innocence, and that's what makes it so interesting. And I think the way that Howard Shore uses motifs in Lord of the Rings is just absolutely remarkable, and The Hobbit as well. But as I say, it's absolutely linked to opera, as you said before, as is musical theatre. Les Mis is incredibly operatic in its sense of scale and the way that it kind of tells its story through music. I mean, there are very few musicals now that are through composed like that. Most have gone back to kind of being book-based musicals where you have a scene and then people just feel like they can't possibly express their emotion through talking, so they break into song.
Yes.
Les Mis isn't that. Les Mis is through composed, and obviously that's very operatic as well in kind of its device.
Hamilton does that as well, doesn't it, really well, where the songs, which I think is the more powerful way of doing it, where the songs are taking the plot forward. So it's not just I've reached a peak of emotion, now I'm going to sing about that emotion.
Absolutely.
It's like every song really is advancing the plot.
Yeah.
Well, there's only like one scene in all of Hamilton that's spoken and not sung. So it really is an opera.
Yeah.
And if we think about how we define those things, it has those operatic qualities for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And look, there's maybe not the musical underpinnings, the way that we package it probably has changed. Like Les Mis is certainly harmonically less operatic than, say, Madame Butterfly, for example. In terms of its harmonic language, it's much more contemporary in terms of its kind of choices of melody. But at its core, at its structural core, it's opera in a nutshell, really. As is a lot of certainly kind of heavy orchestral film. Big orchestral movies like Avatar, Star Wars, and those big epic. Star Wars. I think famously George Lucas has called that a space opera, and there's absolutely a reason why he's used that. Why he's used that 100%. To describe that franchise. And Avatar, I think, is the same. It's very operatic in its sense of scale.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, it's huge. Graham, we're going to have to wrap things up in a second. This has been so lovely. We do have 2 final questions for you,
sure,
which we ask all of our guests. The first is, what were you up to during your teenage years that for you sort of set yourself up for the career you've ended up having? Like, what did you do that maybe turned out to be the most useful, even if it didn't seem that way at the time, is the first question.
Wow, that's a good question. During my teenage years, I guess I was really fortunate when I went to school that I had a school that was willing to encourage exploration, and they were willing to encourage like a focus on extracurricular aspects of their learning. They weren't sort of channeling all the kids into just go and do this very typical kind of tertiary thing. And the best example that I can give of that, which I still kind of find slightly remarkable, is that at the time, I think I was in year 10, and I had been, in the previous years, I went to this quite big school, had multiple campuses, but I went to kind of the small campus, which finished at the end of year 10, and then you went to a bigger school for your final, equivalent of the sixth form over here. So when I was in my last year, what would be fifth year or year 10 here in the UK, I had been in the previous years, I had been in school plays, and it got to a point where I think my memory is that there was an English teacher who she wrote these little musicals, and they were kind of review pastiche things. They were perfectly innocent and not particularly memorable, but they were very charming and very nice. And I got to the year 10, and I just thought, I just don't really want to do that. It just doesn't really sound very interesting to me. And so I went to the school drama department and I said, can we put on our own play? Can we write our own thing, and can we put it on, in the school theatre? And could you maybe help us out with props and costumes? And they did. And they let us do it. And it ended up that there was a school kind of arts grant that we could go and ask for a very nominal, very small amount of money. I think it was probably $400. So we could build a set and, maybe buy some costumes and whatever. But I just think back now and I think how amazing that I was allowed to do that. And I think what that gave me was this idea that I suppose I was sort of more in control of my own destiny than I thought I was. I think if I think back to my time at school, I think I certainly felt this, and I think a lot of my peers felt this way too. I think you can really easily feel like you're being kind of pushed down this road and you don't really have your own sense of momentum. You don't really have your own sense of destiny. It's like you have to go and you have to do this class and then you have to go here and then you have to do this and this and this and this. And the idea that I had a little more say, and I think that's a realization that tends to come to children just as they're about to leave school. And I think that's a real shame. I think, I wish kids who are a little younger, I feel very fortunate to have had that kind of lesson given to me when I was like 15, rather than when I was in year 12 and having the conversation with like a careers counselor going, what are you going to do next? That the idea that was given to me earlier on was really useful. And I have taken that, that kind of idea of exploring and kind of curiosity, I've taken that through. And so I would just encourage, I don't think anyone can predict. I mean, surely the last 3 years have taught us, if they've taught us anything, it's that we can't predict what the future's going to hold. And so I don't think it's necessarily about what you're doing right now. It's about the way that you're doing it. Because I can almost guarantee that the majority of kids listening to this, what they think that they're going to do for their lives now, in 5, 10, 20 years' time, they'll be doing something very, very different. And I hope more rewarding than they could have ever considered and believed possible. So I'd say that that's the important aspect of it is think about how you're doing something and why you're doing it, I guess. You have to have a passion.
So, I mean, the last question is, what advice would you give to that teenage self? But I feel like you've almost...
What would I give to my teenage self? Yeah.
You've almost covered it in the sense of like, it's the dedication and the way you do it. But if you have other advice that you would give... I think
so. I mean, great. I think advice, is... I can only share what's been useful for me. And I think I've already sort of covered it earlier in the chat. And that is to just always be... I think having a healthy sense of humility and a healthy sense of, as I said before, what you bring to the table, not just as an employee, not just as a worker, but most importantly as a person. What are you bringing to the process? So if you're on a set in any capacity, how are you? How are you acting? How are you treating the people around you? And secondary to that, the thing that we've already mentioned about having a sense of what you need to work on. My suspicion is that most people are very good at that. I think we spend so much of our lives beating ourselves and going, I'm no good at this. I don't know how to do that, blah, blah, blah. What I think a lot of people struggle with is the flip side of that coin about going, what do I do really well? And what is something that I can contribute that no one else can? And I think if you can have a healthy balance between those two perspectives, I think, whatever line of work you end up going into, whether it's something in the film industry or creative industry or something else entirely, my suspicion is that will set people in good stead for the future. Certainly helped me.
Amazing. Graham, thank you so much. This has been such a treat. We
Pleasure.
Really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and story with us. It's really, mind-blowing and super cool.
Thank you very much. Lovely to talk to you guys. Thank you.
That was amazing.
Yeah, wow. That was really informative is not even the right word because it was so intriguing and interesting as well. I think as a person who doesn't know anything about music, like I think what he can do and what he does is so impressive and also really integral to filmmaking. If you think about some of the greatest we talked about many of them, right? If you think about some of the greatest films that are out there that people love, and then you say, okay, now take away the score, they're not going to hit. What are you left with?
If you remove Duel of Fates from Star Wars, not even the same. Not even remotely the same. Not the same movie.
Yeah.
That is I'm obsessed with that. Sometimes I rewatch just that scene and almost tear up. And sometimes I just put Jewel of Fates on the tube.
When I'm having a sad day, I put the Shire music on from The Hobbit from the first Lord of the Rings, from when they go to the Shire, because the Shire music just makes me so happy, and it makes me think of that film, which makes me happy, and it's amazing. And I really liked the thing that he said. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, is the Shire music the one that's like...
Yes. That's part of that first song as well.
Part of it.
That the one that he did the little the one that he did the little snippet of, that's the beginning of that song. And that is the music that comes back right at the very end when he's like, Mr. Frodo, the eagles are coming. And it's like so good.
It's also, it's the cue that plays. This is one of my top movie moments of all time, is when Aragorn says to them, "You bow to no one." And everyone on the top of Minas Tirith bows down to these 4 hobbits, and the theme tune kicks in, and you're like,
it's so emotional, and you're like, oh my god,
so emotional. I'm almost in tears. It really is something. My hairs are all standing up. This is the tingliest I've ever been on the YFA podcast. Let it be known.
Amazing. Amazing.
But that's
a badge of honor for Graham.
It really is.
And I also really liked. I really liked the thing that he said about. He sort of, when we asked him, about what he was doing in his young life, and he was talking about, he was essentially talking about agency. He was talking about how young people get to decide what they want to do. And I just think that's such an important message that, that I don't want us to skip over, that you have this. And I do think young people today, more than probably any other generation, I hope, feel that they have agency over what it is that they do. But I think that that's such a great, you're the author of your story, nobody else. So, remembering that, I think, is just a really powerful message.
100%. And also just like the idea of, even if your focus evolves, so the thing that you're trying to make happen evolves and changes, whether that's like career ambitions or even just you move art form, right? Like not many people who are YouTubers when they were younger imagine being YouTubers, because YouTube didn't exist. And so it's applying yourself in the right way. I love that sense of do things well, bring yourself to them and make the most of everything. But the thing that you're actually doing might change, but get used to sort of putting the time in, putting the energy in, and trying to make a success of the thing that you're working on.
Definitely. And I also think, his message is also great in terms of, because I'm an actor and I also do lots of other things. And I think, he was a person who came from the acting world, came from the musical theater world. And I think sometimes when you're a performer, you sort of think, well, this is the only thing. This is it. This is what I want to do for forever. And if you know that and you end up doing that, more power to you. But also being willing to be adaptable and malleable and change according to your own needs. That other thing about having agency is also having the agency to say, actually, I'm not doing the thing I want to be doing. He realized that the life of a performer didn't work out with what he really wanted in his relationship and in his career. And what a brave move to say, okay, that's not the thing for me, I'm going to change. That's also a really important element too, I think, of how you approach it.
I actually philosophically was pondering on this yesterday. I went to see the Lehman trilogy. I don't know if you're aware of the Lehman trilogy.
I am. I actually auditioned for the Lehman trilogy.
No way. Oh, amazing. I saw like Sam Mendes' show, and it was so good. But it really made me think about sort of opportunity and how, we can be bullish in being like, I want to make this happen. And that's well and good. And you should do that. But I don't think you should have your blinkers on and blind yourself to different opportunities, because there might be something else that actually is an opportunity to take you to the next level. And then it might not be exactly what you thought you were going to do, but do it. And that will possibly also help you simultaneously work on the thing you are really committed to as well. So, you might want to be a writer, so keep writing, that's fine. But then you have an opportunity to go and, let's say, go into editorial department. Well, then you can start moving up that ladder and start building contacts that you can cross-pollinate for your writing, that you will then get it in front of people. But it's not being so blind to see an opportunity to move up the ladder, I think, which is the sense I got as well.
Funnily enough, I think what you were saying is something I was also just about to say, which is you just want to be careful that your dreams don't become a cage. Because I think if you too wholeheartedly, too steadfastly try to achieve something, it can make you have those blinkers or those blinders. I always think about what they do to horses, and it's like, well, they've made you see that this is the only path, but it's not. There are so many paths, and it's always going to be squiggly. I think we've said this many times on the podcast, and it's something we come back to, that careers in the arts especially are not linear. You might think, like you said, that you're going to move up this one ladder, but if you get an opportunity to change ladders and go up a few steps on that one and then change to another one, it's never going to be A to B to C all the way to Z. So I think it's just being willing to, and embracing, in fact, the opportunities that arise from those, what might feel like left turns in your career or in your trajectory, but actually all are helping you just become a more well-rounded person, and also, whatever your profession is.
So I always picture it as like being in I'm going to say a glass cube or a glass box. And except it's more like plexiglass. Do you know what I mean? Because I feel like glass is too cold. Yeah. And you're just like, you want to become hot air, which basically you want to get so talented that you rise like hot air. You're active, you're bouncing around. But then eventually you reach sort of that glass ceiling. Mm-hmm. And you keep sort of bumping into it, and you're sort of bumbling around the room, but you keep hitting the ceiling and you can't get to the next level until there's a hole over in one side, and you need to sort of go up over there, and then you can go through to the next level there, and there's another cube above, and then you rise again, and you're bouncing around and you're trying to find where the hole is to then take you to the next level. But being like so convinced, like, no, it's in this corner, this is the corner I want to be in. It's like, well, there's no hole there at the moment. There's no way through there right now. And you can keep hitting, and eventually it might break, but there's another way round that you can get to the next level to further yourself. That's my imagery. I thought that's a really
interesting image. Yeah, I think it makes total sense. Definitely.
This week we have a question from Jessica. Jessica wants to know how she can start using music software, which is pretty cool. So I actually taught myself music software during lockdown. So I have some inkling, but I was already semi-good with software, but I can't play a single instrument. So Jessica, if you can play the piano, then you're already doing better than me, because you can play like a digital keyboard, connect it to a computer, and then you create MIDI information, which is what was mentioned on the podcast earlier with Graham. And then you can change that to other instruments and violins and stuff. But there's tutorials online, which is a really lazy answer, isn't it?
It's not lazy though.
Tutorials for the software.
I was really impressed, and I think this ties back to what we talked to Graham about, which is that he got that task for The Amazing Spider-Man, and instead of saying he didn't know how to do it, he said yes, and he taught himself to do it, and he watched everything there was online to watch about it, and then he did it. So I think Jessica can do that too.
100%. Find those YouTube videos. In conclusion, be more like Graham. I like that sort of episode philosophy. Do email your questions though to podcast@youngfilmacademy.co.uk, where we will answer them on a relevant episode. But this has been fun. It's been
wonderful.
This has been a mega episode, actually. I think this is the longest ever episode, and I ain't complaining, because this has been very special. So
been fantastic. So good.
Thank you very much for joining us, everyone.
Thanks, guys.